וכי נפשי אס השם
Today, Mitzvah Shem, we're going to complete a Perek Achad, chapter 11, and start a new chapter, chapter 12, both at the same page, which is page 102. We're going to for sure discuss several subjects since there are two chapters. One, we're going to complete the whole issue of carrying and throwing from one domain to another. We're going to crystallize the chatat offering, the sin offering, for someone who committed any type of sin unintentionally. And then we go to the next chapter, which is dealing with a separate melacha, separate type of labor, that it's considering a special entity, which is building. Building in that sense, it's not necessarily someone who's creating a physical building, but can be many derivative items that we're going to learn in Mitzvah Shem in 102b. Somewhat of introduction for people who are not familiar with all the Hilchot Shabbat. We explained many times that the Torah repeats the importance of observing Shabbat in many locations. The Torah uses a positive sense and negative sense. In the sense of negative, the Torah uses a certain type of punishment for someone who's not observing it. One of the category, it's the category of shogeg, meaning someone who not observed the Shabbat not because he did it with intent to violate Shabbat, but it was an act of shgaga, of unintentional act. The Torah said in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 4, in two sources, one in chapter 4 sentence 2 and one in chapter 4 sentence 27. In sentence 2 the Torah said a soul v'nefesh ki techta, and a soul that committed a sin, meaning since the Torah is broader and speak about sin as far as the Shabbat, the rabbi derived from that the whole idea of unintentional act, and therefore unintentional act, they say that you need to have quote-unquote complete act, which is we explained many times, for example, akira and hanacha, which is uprooting an item from one domain and putting it in another domain. The big question is, since it doesn't have the full scope of a labor, is that under the category of exemption, full exemption, or you say that it's under the category of someone who does something unintentional? There are others who hold that the source for that is the book of Leviticus chapter 4 sentence 27. In that sentence said ba'asota, that soul did achat mimitzvot Hashem asher lo ta'aseh. Now one of the commandments that God commanded us that we should not do, via negativa, meaning that someone did some type of unintentional sin on Shabbat, and then he realizes that it's something wrong. Now, here is the issue. If someone, for example, throw an item, as we discussed in a previous session, and while he did it, on the process, someone warned him that he is in violation. So again, is that under the category of sin offering, or we totally exempt? So that's the broader understanding of background of this Mishnah. Now let's zoom in and read the Mishnah. As we said in the previous time, the only way that someone is under the full shgaga, full need of sin offering, again, the time of Beit HaMikdash, the time of a temple, it was a special offering that people used to bring. It's called a sin offering, but the sin offering was for something that the person did unwittingly, unintentionally. So he said that if a person, for example, forget that today is Shabbat, or another option, he didn't realize that this type of work is forbidden, so then if in the full scope of doing so, then is under the category of sin offering. So the Mishnah said, Hazorek v'nizkar someone throw unintentionally an object from one domain to another, or v'nizkar, and then after the object left his hand, for example, one who throw an object 4 cubits within the public domain, and then he remembered that he's in violation of a prohibition of Shabbat. Trace a simple scenario. You do something and someone tell you, excuse me, you cannot do that today. It's Shabbat, you can't do it. And either you don't realize that it's an issue of violation of Torah law, or you just forget that today is Shabbat. So they said, מאחר שיצא מידו, since that item already left his hand, so it's already in a process. Now we try to analyze in a sense that we have in the how do you call it in production world? You show it in a very short. You show an action, the scene of the action, in the very slow motion, right? So in that sense, we try to deal with the slow motion of that action. We try to analyze the way that the Talmud analyze. So that fellow, let's call him Reuven, he takes this item and he throw it. Now that item is up in the air, and then that item did not land on the ground, but what happened is klata acher, if another one just caught that item, another option, klata kelev, if a dog caught it inside his mouth. Again, it sounds very funny, but the whole idea is you have to think deeper. In a sense, we're not like those of you who went to a law school. You know that many classes for people who was not dealing with research, or people who not know the analytic way, they are thinking that those classes are boring. But what they don't understand, that in order to be a good attorney, for example, you need to know the whole process of thinking, of understanding the law, and then you can analyze it and use it in a practical manner. So in that sense, when we use an example of someone else caught it, or dog get it to his mouth, just get conceptualize the idea. Or shenisrefa, or for example, if it was burned. Let's say it was a fire around, and while it was in the air, caught a fire. So they said, and here's the point, he is exempt. What does that mean, he is exempt? He is exempt from what? From bringing a sin offering. Why do we think he's exempt from bringing a sin offering?
If they catch it? You're saying in these situations?
For example, the dog or person...
Because the action wasn't completed. They didn't place it down in the other domain.
Since, very good, David. Since the process did not complete it, we just brought 2 sources from Torah that said that you need to have the full process in order to have someone under the category of sin offering. Again, the best category is free from anything.
Right.
Then the next category is a sin offering, and then intentionally is a different story.
Right, but the malacha of transferring requires both transferring from one domain to the other and placing it in the other domain. It has to have both those actions. So.
Excellent. Zarak la'asot chabura. Someone makes him mad. I don't know if you guys ever experienced that. But if one throw a rock on Shabbat, right? He's just, for some reason, ben ba'adam ben ba'bema, to inflict a wound on a person or an animal, right? Venizkar, and suddenly he is remember that all of a sudden that he is in violation of what? Of the of Shabbat. So you say that he is liable to bring a sin offering, basically, if he throw it, but in that case, patur. Before the wound was inflicted, he is exempt. So in other words, even he caused a wound, but since he lifted up the stone, he didn't realize that today is Shabbat, for example. And then, while the stone is up in the air, he realized that it's Shabbat. So as far as the sin offering, we're not talking here the law of damages. We talk about sin offering. As far as the sin offering or violation of Shabbat, if you realize later, not at the time of doing it, later, he is exempt. Does everyone understand this principle? Because basically, if someone damaged an animal or a person, he needs to bring a sin offering. Even that he intend to do it and he didn't cause them a damage, he still need to bring the sin offering. But because any type of chabala, any type of damage, it's from his, it's called kocho, it's his strength and his power. But because he forgot totally that today is Shabbat, before that action completed, then we exempt him. Ze haklal, and now listen carefully, that's the completion of the Mishnah. This is the principle. כל חייבי חטאות אינן חייבים עד שתהא תחילתן וסופן שגגה. All who are liable to bring a sin offering are only liable if the beginning of the action and the conclusion of the action are unintentional. So therefore, if it was תחילתן שגגה וסופן זדון, if the beginning of one action was unintentional and the conclusion was intentional, because only later on that process of a slow motion he realized that he was in a violation of prohibition of Shabbat, so he said, so he is exempt. תחילתן זדון וסופן שגגה, if he begins with an action with intentional, but the conclusion was again unintentional, again pturim. It's both cases a person free from, exempt from bringing a sin offering. Ad, that's the crucial part. Ad shetehet tchilatan v'sofan shgaga, until we reach a point that both the beginning and the end all together was made unintentional, unwitting. The minutes that you don't have that, it's already free of sin offering. Does everyone understand this? I look at you, you nod your head, so I understand that you fully comprehended. We have here among us descendants of the Vilna Gaon, so if there's any question, he must probably answer better than anyone else. And now let's go. What? Let's go.
I train my dog so he catches things.
All right.
That's as far as I know.
Okay. Let's go to the Gemara.
Just in case you make a mistake.
Exactly. Have him follow me on Shabbat.
Okay. So we said so far in the Mishnah that someone did it, he is free from a sin offering. So they said ha-nacha. But if that object comes to rest, chayav, he is liable. How come? How come?
Well, you transferred it out and it came to rest. I mean, and you placed it down.
Yes,
So
but
completed the action.
But let's say the moments that it rested, he realized that it's Shabbat. So you judge him differently than 3 seconds earlier when it's still up in the air. How come? Vahalo. Now we bring another source that contradicts it. We said nizkar, if he recalled either by someone else or by himself that today is Shabbat before that item reach a point of resting. Even let's exaggerate and said 3 seconds before the completion of that action. Utnan, what we said at the end of the Mishnah, we said Kol chayavei chataot enan chayavim eshetel tchilatan v'sofan shgaga. We said that all who are liable to bring a sin offering are only liable if the beginning of the action and the conclusion of the action will be unwitting. So, in other words, if someone remember before the act complete, he should be exempt. And what do you see here? You see here that it's like, it's a matter of 1 second that he turned around and you said you need to bring a sin offering for that. So explain, we crystallize it. Amar Rav Kahana said, Seifa atan lelechta umatna. So he said, we have come to a special case of a bolt and a cord, which means the bolt is connected to the cord, and that one is held in his hand, which in a sense make him capable of retrieving the bolt before it lands. Okay, for example, those animals in the old days, right? That's the way they loaded them. So even the beginning was unwitting and the conclusion was intentional, is exempt because he's still capable of changing the outcome of the action. On the other hand, if you talk about the first part of the Mishnah, once the object left his hand, the action is irreversible, right? So therefore, it is an action, the beginning and conclusion are both unwitting. Clear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, we ask a question. Lechta umitna ogdo beyado hu. If you're talking about the case that the bolt and the cord is one, and one who holds it is in his hand, so what happened here? You don't have an act of throwing actually took place. So you said that what? Is no liability to bring a sin offering. So here the Rashi said the word klomar, and I explained here in my book, Birak Klomar Berashi al Hashas, I explained this Rashi. Rashi have an issue of conceptualize the whole idea here of a Rav Kahana. So Rashi said that the key point, he used the word klomar, that even that person recall that it's a mistake, he still need to bring a sin offering. Only if a dog or someone else caught it. In other words, this first clause of the Mishnah is extremely different than the last part, the second part, because the first clause speak about a person that needs to bring a sin offering. Regardless, the only way to let him out of that is if another entity, such as human or dog or something like that, caught that. But again, I talk at length in that book, and you can read it directly from the source. So they said, Kegon, he explained, Kegon shenitkaven la'asot chabura. So an example to that is if someone intent, if one throw on Shabbat to inflict a wound on a person or an animal, so now you enter to a new domain. It's not because the violation of carrying it from one domain to another. It's the issue that he basically caused a damage to another person or to animal. And now what happened is, and hanametanina hazorek la'asot chabura. If someone throw something, a rock on Shabbat to inflict a wound on a person, ben be'adam ben ba'bema, or an animal, v'nizkar ad shelo na'aset chabura patur, and you remember before the wound was inflicted, he is exempt from a sin offering. So they said, therefore, Ela Rava b'ma'avir. So Rava said this principle was stated with regard to a case of carrying. It's not throwing an object. So, because one holding the object the entire time while violating the prohibition, he's capable of letting it go at any time. So, you mean to say that both the first process and the end was both made with full intent. So now we rejected that point as well. V'hazeh haklal katane. Wasn't this principle was taught with regards to what? Azrika ktane, throwing, because in that topic, that was the Mishnah said. Elama Rava tartei katne. Rava said that two separate matters were taught in the Mishnah. Number one, hazorek, if someone throw unwittingly an item, me'achar sheyatzta miyado v'nizkar, so he threw that item in the public domain, and now we recall that today is Shabbat, and because it left already his domain, he left his hand, me'achar sheyatzta miyado, inam, so that's one situation. Iname lo nizkar, So in other words, he just threw it, and he doesn't even know what that is in violation. הוא קטלה אחר, and someone else caught it in the air, או קטלה כלב, or a dog caught it, or שנשרפה, or it was burned, פטור, he's exempt. The first situation is free because here we call that today Shabbat, before that item rests. So the reason is because, as David said earlier, you don't have a completion of action in that sense. But now, if someone intend to do damage to an animal, to a person, etc., so you're speaking here about something different, about something else, that he has an intent to create something, to create a damage. Right?
I got a question, Rabbi.
Yes.
I could be wrong, or I must be reading in too much to this, but here say, if one person throw a rock on Shabbat to inflict a wound on a person and on an animal, and then later, after he throw the rock, he remember that it's Shabbat, he exempt, but he did it with the intention to inflict wound on a person and an animal, which
Okay, so
trying to hurt somebody,
but
he exempt.
But we explained several times that we must separate in this discussion between law of damages and the law of Shabbat. It's two different things. We don't talking about paying damaging.
Okay.
That's a separate issue. We talk about the melechet machsheva, the intent of a person. If he knew and realized that that he did something before it's completed or not. We are speaking specifically about Shabbat, so it's a very different domain in that sense. And we said many times, in the law of damage in general, you go by the final result. So regardless if a person intend to create damage for another fellow, the minutes that he damaged him. On Shabbat, however, we're dealing with the first cause, which is the thought of the mindset, the process in the mindset of a person, and that's what makes the difference. And the result, it's a different story. So sometimes even the result creates something else. We go again by the pre-plan that the person have in his own brain. Rav Ashi Amar, Chasure mechasra ve'ach iktane. Rav Ashi said the Mishnah is incomplete, and the teaches the following. Hazorek v'nizkar, if someone throw a rock and remember the violation, מאחר שיצתה מידו וקטלה או קטלה כלב או שנשרפה פטור. So after it left his hand, if another caught it, or if dog caught it, or if it was burned, he is exempt. So why? Because that item did not rest from his strength. Hanacha. But if the items come to rest, chayav, he is liable. So even in a sense, Rav Ashi said, even before it's completed. Mm-hmm. You see how deeply we go by the process of thinking when it's come to Shabbat. Bameh dvarim amurim. So Rav Ashi adds to that, and he said, all of what those matter what he meant, shechazar v'shachach, which means in case one then forgot again before the object came to rest. So now, give you an example. Did you ever call somebody and the fellow answered the phone and you stuck because you don't remember whom did you call? Is that ever happened to anybody here?
Oh yeah, me, yeah.
Oh. It happened to you? I forgot your name. Key. So the point is, it happens to people, right?
Yeah.
So here, it looks weird, but they said here, if one then forgot again before the object came to rest, so again, it's not completion, it's not complete act. אבל לא חזר ושכח, פטור, however, if one did not forget again, he is exempt. Why? So he said, this is the rule, because כל חייבי חטאות אינן חייבים עד שתהיה תחילתן וסופן שגגה. Because all who are liable to bring a sin offering are liable only if the beginning of the action and the conclusion of the action are both unintentional. So as long as you don't have that completion, they don't have the full obligation. Rashi explained here that that's the concept of that he even 2 seconds after it left his domain, and he realized it's already in another mindset. We learn also in the Mishnah, זה הכלל, כל חייבי חטאות. We learn in the Mishnah, this is the principle, all who are liable to bring a sin offering are only liable if the beginning of the action, conclusion are unwritten. Itmar, שתי אמות בשוגג, שתי אמות במזיד, שתי אמות בשוגג. If one move and carry an object in a public domain 2 cubit unintentionally, and then before he carry it 2 more cubit unintentionally, and then he carried 2 additional unusually. So he explained many times, in order to be in violation, you need to have 4 cubit. So Rabba Amar Patu, Rabba Amar Chayav. Rabba said that he is exempt from sin offering. Rabba said that he is liable. Rabba Amar Patu, Afilu Rabban Gamliel de Amar, En Idia Lachatzi Shiur. Remember, we discussed it earlier, but it's also in page 105. If someone writes on Shabbat 2 letters, so we said if it was in a two separate times that he wasn't aware, so you don't you only say that he needs to bring a sin offering if it was, in a sense, in completion of the 2. So he said Hatam over there, hu deka hatam hu dekhi kagamar shiura beshogeg kagamar olachad bemezid lo. So only said when the measure of determined liability was completed. It was completed with unintention. However, when the measure is completed, and it's completed intentionally, which means that we said that the person is not he is not liable to bring a sin offering. Ubemai. And what the case we stated, if one is in regard of throwing, his entire act is unintentional. Why? Because he become aware there is nothing he could be prevent from the subject of lending. So you must say the person who's carrying. So now he's carrying, and in the midst of carrying, he realizes then he has some control over that action, right? Rava Amar Chayav, Rava said that he's liable. Even so, in other words, Rabbah said that he is exempt because he don't have the completion. Rava said that he is liable. Why? Even according to the sages who said that there is a awareness for a half a measure, and therefore he is exempt, there is only said where they still in control. In other words, you have a control of the completion of that action. So that's basically terminate the action. But here, hatam hu biyado avalacha den biyado la, but here is not in his control. So when he's not in control, ubema, in what case it's stated, I b'ma'avir arei biyado ve'ela bezorek. So when regard to carrying, we said must have been said that with regard to a case of throwing, so then Rabba and Rava do not disagree. They all discuss just separate situation. Amar Rabba, zarak venacha b'fnei הכלב ובפי הכבשן חייב. Rabba said if one unwittingly throw an object from one domain to another, and it wasn't intentional, and then he throw an object 4 cubit in public domain, which said that the minutes that he exceeded 4 cubit is in violation, and it come to rest in the mouth of a dog, just an example, or in a furnace, so he's liable. And what we said earlier, now we see the contradiction. We learn didn't we learn in Mishnah that if the other caught it, or the dog caught it, or it's burned and is exempt, so you see conflicting sources. So he explained it, and he said, again, we go on Shabbat with Melechet Machshevet, we go in the thought of a person, and over there they talk about intention to throw it into a dog mouth, right? You guys have dogs, so you know the dog came to snatch the object, so he preventing it from landing its intent destination. Since the intention of the thrower was not realized, so he is exempt. However, here Rabbah said that the one who throwing is liable if he intend to throw the object into the dog mouth. So then he's liable because his intention was realized. Amar Rav Bei Bai Bai Rabbi Afanana Mentanina. He said, we also learn this. Yesh ochel achila achad v'chayav alei arba'a chatot v'asham echad. There is a person that can perform a single act of eating, even a small size as kezait, as olive bark of food, and is liable to bring 4 sin offering and 1 guilt offering. How so? You know, it's remind me a fellow who was talking on the phone, and he passed the red light, and the police officer, pushed the horn and called him, and he ignored him, and he continued driving, and because he was so preoccupied with the phone, and then only the police came before him and stopped the car, cut him off, then he stopped. So when the police officer came to that guy, he basically talking about a person driving one car, but he's in a long list of violations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they said here you have a situation that one performed a single act of eating even a small size of olive bark of food, and is liable to bring 5, which is 4 sin offering and 1 guilt offering. How so? We said, if one is ritually impure, okay, who ate a forbidden fat, as you know, even you're slaughtering animal, the fat is forbidden, that was left over from what? From consecrated offering, which means that they have a time that that may be eaten expire, and on the top of that it happened on the Day of Atonement. So here you have a situation that the person is liable to bring 1 sin offering for what? For eating a consecrated food while impure. 1 sin offering for eating a forbidden fat. 1 for eating a notar, a leftover food that designated for, and 1 for eating on the Day of Atonement. And bring a guilt offering for misuse of consecrated items. Right? Rabbi Meir Omer, the Vilna Gaon have a lot to say about it, we're just running out of time. Rabbi Meir Omer, אף אם הייתה שבת והוציאו בפיו חייב. Rabbi Meir said there is 1 more sin offering for which he is maybe liable. In addition, if it was Shabbat, Shabbat sometimes occurred at the same time with Yom Kippur. So if it was Shabbat and he carried this olive bark of food from one domain to another in his mouth, he is liable for carrying out on Shabbat. אמרו לו אינו מן השם. So the rabbi said to him, so the liability of sin offering that you add are not incurred from the carrying out food. והמאי הדרך הוצאה בכך. So they said that they explained that carrying was done in his mouth, and it's not typical manner of people that carrying out from one domain to another. So now his answer to what Gil said earlier. אלא כיוון דקה מכוון מחשבתו משוויה למקום. Because since it was in his intention to carry out an object in this matter, so his reflection, his thought, that was render his mouth a suitable place for placing an object.
So, one question though, on this. Why did he have to specify if it was Shabbat? Doesn't Yom Kippur have the same?
Yes, but if they are both occur at the same time, which is Yom Kippur and Shabbat.
But I understand that. But even if it didn't occur, if Yom Kippur did not occur in Shabbat, it's still you can't carry.
Yes, because we want to emphasize on the point of Melechet Machshevet, of the thought. We want to crystallize the point how when it's come to Shabbat we focus, we zoom in the reflection, the thought. So we want to show examples. כיוון דקה מכוון, מחשבתו משוויה למקום. Since he intend to throw an object into a dog mouth, his thought renders the dog mouth a suitable place for placement an object, and he is liable for throwing him there. Hadran alach azorech. We just complete chapter 11, and in Mitzvah Shem we're going to revisit that chapter.
So if you want,
Okay.
so if your intent is to feed your dog and you throw him a piece of food, then that's actually okay. Is that what you're saying with that last remark?
What do you understand?
Saying no.
No?
if the intent was, because that was your intent all along, was to throw it into the dog's mouth, so you still...
Wouldn't it be a suitable place for it to land? That's what I thought he said.
Well, if it's a different domain, then it would be.
You hear what Keith said?
Oh, if it's outside of your
So
domain.
you're transferring it from one domain to the other.
But within your domain,
you
you
intended
can-
to throw it to the dog, then that's essentially like placing it down, because the intended end conclusion of the action was the dog catching it.
Yes. Okay.
And the key point, I just want to refresh your memory, something that's very important. When we talk in Shabbat domains, we're not talking ownership. We talk about domain, which is a private domain in that category, is something that is what? Up to 10, 4, 4 by 4.
Yeah,
Remember
at
that?
least 4 by 4 and 10 tefachim high.
10 handbreadth high.
Mhm.
Public domain, it means that it's a use by people, by public. The difference between public domain and private domain, it's the private domain go up to heaven. It's no limitations. Public domain, it's no more than
10 tefachim high.
10 handbreadth high. Above that, it changed the status to a place of exemption.
Competur.
So we basically on Shabbat have 4 different domains. We have private domain, we have public domain,
Carmelit.
we have Carmelit. Carmelit is like a big ocean
Or desert.
or desert. Or the 4th one is a place of exemption. It's called in Hebrew Makom Ptur. Let's go to chapter 12. In chapter 12, the Torah tells us 6 days you shall labor, the 7th day shall be rest. The Torah said in Exodus 34, in plowing and in harvest shall you rest. So we have 39 category of labor prohibited on Shabbat. Now we're going to focus on 3 important labor, and that's, by the way, the name of the chapter is one of them. One, it's called boneh, building. Number 2 is plowing, and number 3 is writing. Okay, so first we need to deal with a category and then a subcategories. Category meaning direct building, for example, and subcategory it's like derivative from that specific action. Haboneh kama yivneh v'yeh chayav. Since we said that one of the prohibition is to build on Shabbat, so we want to deal with someone who building something, and we ask what size a person build, how much he must build liable to bring a sin offering. Again, we talk about one of the two. Either mezid, it was intentional, and under that category, or sin offering when it was unwitting. So they said that boneh kol shehu. If one who builds is liable for building any amount, even small size. Vehamesatet. If someone a chiseled, which means you take the stone and you just prepare the stones. In those days they used to do hands. Now we have the machines that prepare the sharpening those stones to make it ready for building. So the way that they do, some they do it for beautification, some do it for the structural foundations. Ve'amakeh bapatish, and one who strike with hammer. Soon we need to explain what is a striking a hammer. In general, it means completion of work, striking with hammer. Ubema'atzad, or one who use a adze. Hakodeach, or someone who drills a hole. Kolshu, drilling a hole in any side. So anyone who did any one of these, chayav, he is liable. Ze haklal, this is the principle. Kol ha'oseh melacha umelachto mitkayemet b'Shabbat. If anyone who did any type of prohibited labor, and his labor indoors on Shabbat, chayav, he is liable. So what does that mean indoors? It means that type of work make it in such a manner that people used to do it. In other words, it's not someone who makes something odd, something weird, something uncanny that people don't use it. We talk about creating something that it's in use. רבן שמעון גמליאל אומר, he's completed, and he said, אף המכה בקורנס על הסדן בשעת מלאכה חייב מפני שהוא כמתקן מלאכה. Now we entered to a new domain. Rashi said the domain of metaken, which means even one who strike an anvil with a sledge hammer during his labor has performed a constructive act, he is liable because he is one of the who improved the labor that he is performing. So now is a new category which taking some type of labor and improving it. So the GEMARA said, Kol shu lemai chazia, if you speak about any small amount of building, for what use it's suited, אמר רבי ירמיה, שכן אני חופר גומה להצניע פרותיו. Here is an example. Again, you have to know also the historical context. He said, any indigent, any poor person, dig a hole in the floor of his house in which he hide his coins, right? Hide his money or whatever. They use a poor person, right? Rich person sent it to Switzerland. So they said, "Dichvata gabei mishkan." Dichvata gabei mishkan. Since we learn everything corresponding to the way that it was in the tabernacle in the time of the temple, so digging a hole in the floor of the house, under what category we hold it, is the same as what?
Well, that could be like planting.
That's basically building.
Or building. I mean, well, if it's in the house. I mean, wouldn't it also be planting?
Planting. Well,
Afterwards.
digging,
Maybe if you're
preparing.
getting interest on it somehow by some remote bank, but that's not really happening.
if you get an interest.
Well, no, but I mean the digging part. Isn't that part of the...
No, but in that sense it's building.
Okay.
Building. So since we did everything the way that it was in tabernacle, שכן תופרי ריאות חופרים גומה להצניע במחתיהם. Since we derive all this concept from the way that it was in a biblical time, which is when the children of Israel were wandering in a desert, it was a building of temporary temple, which called Mishkan, and in that was 39 category of labor, of work that we made. So one of those was those who sewed curtains in a tabernacle, dug hole in which to hide their needles. So Abaye says, since the needles rust in the ground, they did not do so. So now the GEMARA asks a different example of small scale building that is significant. אלא שכן אני עושה פטפוטי קירה לשפוך עליה גדרה קטנה. Indigent person, what do? He makes legs for a small stove to place a small pot on it. So דכבתה גבי משען משלבשלט, סמנים לצבוע יריות שחסרה מלאכתן. So the same, the corresponding situation in the tabernacle, which was that those who cooked herbs used to dye curtain, עושים פטפוטי קירה קטנה לשפוך עליה יורה קטנה, whose dyeing process was lacking a small amount for completion. So at that point it was not worth the effort to cook a large quantity of dye, and so they will make a legs for a small stove upon which to place a small cladorm to cook a small bit of dye to finish the job. So again, so we want to show an example of what? That we use a poor person example to show that even a small, since the Mishnah said it's any amount, so even as small as that. Not everyone agreed. They said, 2 Jews, 5 opinions, right? Rav Acha bar Yaakov said, אין עניות במקום עשירות. You can't speak about poverty in a place that people are wealthy. What does that mean? Children of Israel left Egypt. They are wandering in a desert. It's a few weeks from now in the Torah portion, right? Now, they all agreed to build a tabernacle. So, what did they do? Everyone brought the donation and they make everything the best of people. So therefore, in the tabernacle, as any public project, actions are not performed on a small scale or in such a promiscuous quantity. They were performed very much with the generosity of people. So those who cooked dye in the tabernacle had no use for small, cubicles. They have no use for this type of things. אלא שכן בעל הבית שיש לו נקב בבירתו וסותמו. So an example of significant small-scale building is a homeowner who has a small hole in his house and seal it. Dichvata gaber mishman. This you can say that it's a corresponding to the situation that was in a tabernacle. שכן קרש שנפלה בו דרנה, because it was a beam that was set upon by a worm that bore a hole into it. מטיף לתוכה עבר וסותמו. One pours lead into the hole and seal it. אמר שמואל, המצדד את האבן, one who set a stone place on Shabbat, which means you take a building stone and fix it in place on the ground on Shabbat. חייב, he is liable for what? It's an act of what? Help me. Act of what?
Well,
Building. Thank you. Meitive. So the GEMARA asks a question, they objected it. אחד נותן את האבן ואחד נותן את הטיט, הנותן את הטיט חייב. One who puts down a stone and another one places a mortar. And one who placed the mortar is liable for what? Building. So what we understand that the prohibition of building apply only to what? The violation when the mortar is added. So setting a stone in a place is not enough to establish liability. ולתעמיך, the way that you are reasoning earlier, you said, let's go to the second part of the Mishna. Rabbi Yossi אומר אפילו אליו הניח על גבי דימוס של אבנים חייב. Rabbi Yossi said that even he lifts a stone and places it at the top of row of stones, he is liable even without securing with mortar. אלא תלת הבניין אהבו. You have to say that is a three different type of building. Tata metziata ve'ela. You have the bottom row, you have the middle row, and you have the upper row. Tata ba'etzidude ve'afra. The bottom row requires setting a stone in place. Metzia ba'name ba'etina. You have now the bottom, that you have the stones placed dirt to hold its place. You have the middle rows that require mortar as well. And then you have ilai ba'anacha be'alma. You have the upper part that is suffice with mere just placement. So you have three different entities here. V'hamesatet. So we said also in the Mishnah that one who chisel any amount is liable. So why he is liable? Mesatet mishum mechayev. So they say Rav amar mishum boneh, Shmuel amar mishum makir patish. Rav said it's because it's some type of building, and Shmuel said is the idea is like liable to the prohibition of striking, the blow with hammer to complete the production of process of a vessel. So that's they have a lot of halachic implication, practical, because if someone does that in a full intention, you have to go that only if he was warned with two witnesses, that then you can go with mitah. But if you if they tell somebody that you are in violation of something and they are wrong in a sense, he is in violation, but they don't specify the correct violation, so you cannot inflict punishment on that person. In other words, you have not only to have the two witnesses and you have them warn him, but they have to specify something that it's absolute a reflection of that type of labor. Otherwise, he is not in that violation. So they said here, this disputation between one that said that it's type of building, the other one said that it's because of striking a blow with a hammer to complete production of process of a vessel, you see that it's also halachic implications. So they similarly disagree with regard to what here is an example. If someone make a hole, it was a chicken coop and it was made out of wood or beam, and he made a hole there. Why? He wants the part that the chicken have not create a bad odor and create damage to the chicken. So Rav said the issue here that is liable because he's in a violation of building. שמואל אמר משום מכה בפטיש. And Shmuel said that it was because he's striking a blow with a hammer. Again, blow with a hammer doesn't mean literally someone would take a hammer and blow it. What do we understand blowing a hammer? That's crucial for our discussion.
Talking about the final blow? Or?
Final process. Final process doesn't need to be a hammer.
Just completing any project.
Completing any project. El shuftat bekufina demara. So similarly, one who inserts a pin into a handle of a hole, which means he did it in order to secure the handle. Rav amar mishum boneh, Shmuel amar mikom shem HaKadosh. The same thing. Rav said it's a building. Shmuel said it's a prohibited labor of striking a blow with a hammer. Utzricha. So why we need all these examples on the three different disputation. If we have only the first one, which one who make these stones, make it sharper, beautiful. So he said that that's the way that people build building. That's the way they do it. But if someone make the hole in that chicken coop, so then it's something that it's not usual. The people, it's not the manner of building. That's not the manner of building. Maybe he said that is that in different category of what? Of striking a hammer, a blow with a hammer. So if we go to the second one, that they make a hole in the chicken coop, so you say that because it's similar to building, because people do so for what? For ventilation in a chicken coop. They place a window the same way as the people place a window in a building. So you can juxtapose the two. However, inserting a pin into a handle of a hole, which is not a typical manner of building, then derech binyan bekach, maybe Rav agree with Shmuel that is not subsum under the rubric of the prohibition of labor of building. However, if you go the other way, the be'ah kamar Shmuel, אבל בהנחתרתם מודל לרב צריכה. So you maybe say that Shmuel go around, we're going to the other two cases, which is chill sting and making a hole in a coop. So the Shmuel agree with Rav, so then necessary to cite all the three disputes in order to clarify all these specifications. One who chiseled, for which primary category of prohibition is liable. So he said, Ach vele biyadei mishum makeh patish. So what did he do? He used his hand and indicate his hand and he used the term of makeh patish, striking a blow with a hammer. But we said clearly one who chiseled and one who strike a blow in a hammer, which means that there are two different prohibitions. So we have to say that we take out the letter Vav in Hebrew, and we meant to say one who chisels is liable to the prohibition of striking a blow with a hammer. Tashma kodech kol shu chayav. So now we just jump few lines in page 103. So one who drill a hole at any size is liable. Bishama leRav. So if we go by the Rav who said that one who makes a hole in the is liable, why? Because it's a prohibition of building. Here too we should say why. It's appear that one who's making a hole for the purpose of a building. However, according to Shmuel, drilling a hole is not completing a labor, because labor will not be complete only when they stake a pin or insert it into the hole. So how you understand it? So here we drill a hole with an iron nail and left it inside the surface which he drilled a hole. So that's considering a completion of labor, because there is no intention to remove the nail from its hole. So we learn here that's the basically the final word, that's considering a complete labor. Here we learned several practical halachot. First, the Rambam, the great Maimonides in Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 1, and also the in Hilchot Shgagot, chapter 2, he said, Kol chayavei chataot enam chateinu. All who are liable to bring a sin offering are only liable, a person is only liable to bring a sin offering for an unwitting transgression if the act was unwitting from beginning to the end. If at any point while performing the transgression he acted intentionally, he is exempt for bringing a sin offering, which is fascinating. You see how we go by the mind process, the process of thought. Then another halacha, the Rambam said in Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 13, Lechta umitna ogdo biado, the bolt and the cord, one hold in his hand, one who throw an object on Shabbat from one domain to another, while keeping the object tied to a cord in his hand, is exempt. Since he is liable to pull back the object, it's never considered fully placed, and the act of carrying out is incomplete. Shogeg v'mezid of v'shogeg, if one did something unintentionally, intentionally, and unintentionally. For example, one carries an object in his hand 2 cubits in a public domain, unwittingly, and then 2 cubits intentionally, and then another 2 unintentionally. So he is exempt. Why? Because there is awareness for a half of a measure. If he throw an object, he is liable because once he throw it, he is no longer had control over the object. Now we said also zarak v'nacha b'fi ha'kelev. So if one throw an object from one domain to another, and another person or a dog catches the object before it lands, he is exempt because the object did not land as he intended. However, if that was his intention when he threw it, he is liable. So liability to bring several sin offering, we said one who violated several prohibitions in a single action during a single lapse of awareness is liable to bring a sin offering for each transgression. For example, if an impure person ate forbidden fat on Yom Kippur that was both notar, left over, and consecrated, is liable for each and every one of those sin offerings. Now let's conclude the halacha in Perek Haboneh, in the new chapter. Haboneh kama yivneh v'yeh chayav, that's Rambam, Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 10. One who builds even the smaller amount on Shabbat is liable. And we discussed that type of building. One who sets stones in a place to serve as the foundation of a building is liable of striking a blow with a hammer to complete the production process of a vessel. The stone that one lays on the top of the first level must be secure with cement in order to create liability for building. With regard to the top level of stone, if a stone is merely lifted up and placed into a cement, the builder is also liable. Now we said also hamesatet, one who chiseled the slightest amount in stone is liable of striking a blow with a hammer to complete the production process of a vessel. That's the Shmuel opinion. Hausen nekev belush letarnegolim. Example, we said one who makes a hole in a chicken coop on Shabbat to let the light or air is liable for building. That's the Rav opinion. So, but even though the Rambam wrote also that in this case one is liable for striking a blow with a hammer, it seems he thought that that's they both that he thought the way that the Rav said. Ayal shufta bekofina demara said that one who inserts a pin into a utensil violates a derivative, some type of derivation of the prohibition action of building, and is liable. So you see how we wrap up all of that we speak here in this new chapter about the building and striking a hammer, and we say many times that striking a blow and hammer, it's just a completion of work, but not necessarily a physical hammer.
נפשי אס השם